Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Matt Leader.
And I'm Craig Dickinson. And today on the show, we're going to be breaking down David Lynch's Dune from 1984. And Matt, I'm really excited to talk to you about this because I tried to get a little bit of a hint about what you thought about the film, and you told me you were waiting until we recorded.
That is correct.
So tell me, Matt, how much did you enjoy David Lynch's Dune?
I enjoyed it about as much as I enjoyed my root canal. So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. And if you'd like to connect with us.
Oh, my Lord.
This was awful. I have to say that I've heard you mention multiple times about how much you love the book, Dune. And so it's always been on my reading list. And I think you have a better reading habit than I do, personal reading habit than I do. And I, at the moment, have like reading ADHD. Like I cannot settle and finish a book. But I got into Dune and it sucked me in and it was fantastic. And I still haven't quite finished it. But it's been a while since I really got so sucked into a book like that. And so I was really looking forward to it. I wanted to read at least part of the book because the 2021 Dune film isn't the whole book. I think it's roughly half.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, I have to read at least half of it. So I've read that portion going into it. Love the book, got past that halfway point. And so I was like, okay, this is great. I don't really want to watch the David Lynch one. I haven't heard good things about it, but you suggested it. And so we did this episode, we watched the film and kind of broke it down as much as we could. And I got to say, it was not fun. This was rough. I liked Batman versus Superman more, I think. And
well, because that's a great film. This was not.
So it was not good, not fun. And I'll, for my opening thoughts, I'll leave it at that. So what did you think overall for the film?
So, and I was going to say, it actually works out well that you haven't finished the book because this movie is really not a very good adaptation of the book. So you're not really missing anything. There's not really any spoilers too much.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the movie is notoriously bad. And I mean, it came out, I was pretty young. I think I was about 8 or maybe 9, I think, because it came out in December. And I remember hearing how bad it was just from the press. It got horrible press. And I know I saw it fairly young and had no idea what was happening. But it always kind of just stuck in my brain as this is something I want to revisit. And what's funny is, as bad as it is the reason I read the book. So it did kind of serve a purpose in that regard, that it pointed me toward the book, which I do love. It's amazing. It's Lord of the Rings in space. It's that dense. So if you're into those kind of immersive world building novels, that's what you're going to get. With this film, it's an attempt to try and take this massive, dense novel and squeeze it into a 2-hour film.
Yeah.
And that's just not a good idea.
No.
Like we mentioned, the new one that's coming out a couple of days after this episode will release. It's only half the film, or half the book rather, and it's going to be, longer than this film. Sci-Fi Channel did a miniseries, which isn't bad. I don't know if you've seen that one. Probably not if you haven't read the book yet.
No.
Haven't finished that. That's not a bad adaptation as far as hitting the story beats, but it's on a lower budget, and so it's not feature film quality.
Yeah.
But when I watched that, I was like, oh, I get the story. It makes sense now. Whereas this one doesn't. Most of my original, my opening thoughts are, here are the many, many changes from the book. And not in a good way.
Yeah.
And, it starts with that just bizarre intro where you have the princess's face just kind of zooms in, or actually it starts big, right?
Yeah.
It's just bizarre. And, the book is set up where, she's essentially narrating that. That's what she ends up doing. She ends up being like this historian.
Right.
And so she's telling us the story. But what a bizarre choice to have this giant floating head to tell you the story. And then it starts fading in and out. And like, what?
Yeah. And that's also what struck me very quickly, was that I recognized from having read the book, on some level, it kind of makes sense. Like, okay, you've got this kind of narrator, and, that's a tough thing to pull off in film. And so, I recognize that's what they were trying to do, but it just, the floating head, it didn't quite work. It does remind me a little bit of Lord of the Rings, where you do have a epic tale that you're trying to tell, epic on this grand scope. And I also believe that Lord of the Rings would be, before the Peter Jackson films, would be an incredibly tough series of books to properly give a proper film adaptation for. And so in some ways, I think that is a pretty good analog for a very successful film adaptation of a book series that is epic in scope. I do think that Dune as a novel is more challenging because there's so much character thought in the book. And you have to show that in some fashion, some of the emotions, some of the intention that the characters have, and you have to translate that to film. They did translate it, but it was a horrible translation. And the, this is one thing that, we're jumping right into the sound and the cinematography, but it's like the characters thinking in the film, like, I understood it, but it just was not engaging. It didn't feel authentic. It just did not work for me. I didn't buy it. It wasn't believable. It felt out of place to have these characters thinking, quote unquote, out loud as narration during the film. And I think if you have some narration, especially bizarre narration at the beginning, you can kind of forgive it and move on from it. But it kind of continues throughout the whole rest of the film. And the same thing with the floating heads popping up and in and out. And I do get a little bit because there's a sense of kind of trippiness in Dune from the spice, right? And you have that sense of forethought of shooting your mind across the galaxy. And that's difficult to show in film. One film that immediately jumps to my head that did it a million times better is the Doctor Strange film, which also had a very trippy out-of-body experience when Doctor Strange is kind of floating through the galaxy. And granted, they didn't have those kinds of special effects back then, but I feel like what they did, it just didn't work.
Yeah, it kind of serves like a cautionary tale, for some of those later adaptations. And I think, I going back to the Lord of the Rings adaptation, when it starts with Galadriel doing the narration at the beginning of Fellowship, like that to me was and I'd only read the book once at that point, the Lord of the Rings. And that kind of crystallized for me a lot of the things that I had just kind of glossed over just because I wanted to get to the meat of the book. And, it's a very similar type of setup where they, have just a voiceover. You don't see Galadriel's floating head. You have an action sequence and all of these things that you're setting up, that there's this dense and very important history, which you have in Dune as well. And so it looks like, that would be a way you could have done it had you not opted for floating head. So maybe, and I don't know, but maybe Peter Jackson and his people looked at that and was like, let's not do that. Let's try this. Because that worked so much better. To bring you in. This is just, she's giving you a lot of information. I mean, it's awkward too. She has that part where she says, "Oh yes, I forgot to tell you." What do you mean you forgot to tell us? It's about the spice.
Yeah.
And it's about the planet that book is named after. Followed by this extended credit sequence just showing the sand dune with every single person who worked on the film's name popping up. So,
along those lines, I feel like that's an attempt to have this kind of conversational tone. And again, that's kind of what I mean by like, it just doesn't work. Like, that's such an awkward way to do it.
Right.
And spice, especially if this is your first introduction to the story, you have to know about spice. Like, really more than anything else. If you understand that spice is important and how important it is in this story, the rest of the story can kind of be filtered through the world building of the film, if you understand that key concept. And so it's just, it's just baffling the way they decided to do that at the beginning.
Yeah. I'm looking through some of the other things I had for changes from the book, and I'm looking through most of them, and they're later in the book. And so I think I'm going to hold on to those because they're not in the movie, but they're important for the book.
Yeah.
And since you haven't gotten there, I'm going to not talk about that. I'm going to save you that because I made you watch this film. I'll at least let you have that, and then we'll talk about it after you finish the book.
Okay.
So we talked a little bit about cinematography and, starting with the giant head of Irulan over the starfield. I do want to compliment this movie. This movie did do some interesting things, some things very well, I thought. That, we talk about sense of scale a lot in some of these films, and knowing that this film was with models, it was using models, that I think they did an excellent job with some of these things, like the spice harvester, for instance, and also even the sandworms, to filling the screen where once they're up on top of it. I mean, clearly it looks, they're on probably a blue screen back then, not before they did green screen. But when you see them climbing up the side, like, that feels immersive. I buy that to an extent.
Yeah, and I think that the sandworms, that's
right. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I felt like they felt fairly real. I mean, I think they felt organic. The sense of scale definitely did work. I will say that the design of the ships I didn't find particularly inspiring. But as far as sense of scale and the way it was shot, I think it was fine. I really did not find the cinematography too special, but I don't think it was horrible either. When I say it was a horrible movie, it wasn't for, just lack of construction. Like, the basic building blocks were fine. For me, the big problems were with story, with character, with acting. So cinematography, I think, was, for the most part, definitely good, right? It didn't detract from the film in any way for me.
Yeah, there was a couple things that detracted for me, and I noticed on this time through that they reused some of the establishing shots, which I found distracting. I'm like, oh, there's that shot of Getty Prime again with, like, that giant face spewing smoke. That same shot. There's the same exterior shot of, like, the Emperor's palace. It's like it's over in the right hand corner, just like it was when the navigator from the Spacing Guild comes in at the beginning. So same shots there. I'm like, okay, that's not cool. Like, as much money as you spent on this movie, you probably could have come up with a couple of different looking shots for that. Color in this film, a lot of green for the bad guys, which I always like that. Kind of going with
red hair too.
Yeah, so you definitely have the red hair for all the Harkonnens or Harkonnens, depending on how you want to pronounce that. That changes depending on which version you're watching, which is fine. The box with the Gom Jabbar is green as well. And so, when we know later on, we find that, the Reverend Mother, she's not a good person. She's not on the side of good. So that makes sense that she'd have, the green that kind of aligns with the Harkonnens as well. And of course, you have the gold. We talked about this with Casino Royale, kind of like gold being opulence. That the Emperor's palace is just gilded everywhere.
Yeah, and I guess I should clarify a little bit that there were definitely, like the floating head and all that kind of stuff. I didn't catch the reused shots when I watched it, so that didn't bother me. But I mean, this is not a good movie. But
what did you think about the eyes? The way they had the eyes being blue,
and that's actually a really good point. It looked bad, but it's something that I could have easily forgiven and overlooked had I liked the characters and the story had been right. So that's I guess that's more of what I'm thinking is the cinematography was not the cardinal sin, right? It was a tiny sin here and there, sprinkled around like sprinkles. And so, like the eyes, I can kind of take it or leave it. It didn't look good, but I understand some of the limitation of technology. It is
Sure.
what it is. I think the shields that they use look horrible.
Those were so cool in 84. They were awesome.
They
and
were
now
never
it's
cool.
Just, it's
you just didn't
trash.
know it.
That's true. We were ignorant.
Yes.
We're like, this is awesome. It kind of looks like Tron. I'm so into this. And neither one of those films' special effects have held up. But
Yeah. So that was bad.
yeah, it is bad. There's some odd close-ups.
Yeah.
On Yui's mouth. The tooth.
Okay.
That's creepy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, but it's like, again, some of those things could be forgiven had characters and story been better. Right.
If it was in a better movie.
It was in a better movie, you could kind of forgive some of the weirdness. And it's in a bad movie, so we can't forgive it.
Yeah. It's like Death by a Thousand Cuts.
Kind of
this film.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did you think about the voice? Because I thought that was one of the cooler things in this film, the way they do that effect.
I didn't particularly like it. And, thinking back, it does make sense that they use some kind of voice modulation to indicate that that's going on. I do wonder if they couldn't have used cinematography and just like repetition, right? And like using, focusing the camera up on Jessica or Paul when they're using it and indicating something's going on. And they kind of do this in Force Awakens when Rey is trying to use the Jedi mind trick, right? Where there's a little bit of music, a little bit of sound effects, but it's also cinematography. It's all kind of blending in there. And it helps, yes, that, we know what she's kind of trying to do. But even in the original Star Wars, I mean, it wasn't voice modulation. It wasn't my favorite. I thought it was okay. I didn't mind it, but at the beginning, it struck me as very weird, like when I first heard it. And then as I went on the film, it kind of eased up on it.
Yeah. And that's one of those many things that, Lucas has admitted that Star Wars has taken some things from Dune. I mean, even just the desert planet alone. But that, the Bene Gesserit are kind of proto-Jedi in a lot of ways. And so it's very much like a Jedi mind trick when they're using the voice. So that's cool.
Yeah.
One thing that jumped out at me a lot this time is that the main theme for this film, which is super repetitive, I was like, well, that's just sticking in my brain. And that sounds really familiar. Why is that so familiar? And then I realized, oh yeah, that's Dies Irae, Day of Wrath, over and over again. It's Judgment Day is coming, which is kind of an interesting a concept for, with Paul's coming. I mean, it is Judgment Day for the galaxy when he shows up. And that's not something that really fits with the film itself that we get. In the book it is. Because I know you've gotten to the part already where, he's talking about the jihad and trying to avoid that. That's not a thing that comes up in this film at all. He is very much like
tangentially.
He's the savior. Everything's going to be great.
Yeah. Well, and that's another part where the book is rich with ideas and philosophy and the movie hints that it's there. Because, in the movie, you have him standing in front of his soldiers and stuff. But it's very glossed over as kind of a montage of, oh, and by the way, he's got a giant army with him. Okay, right? There's no indication that he may not want that. Which I think in the book is pretty clear that he's very wary of the actual military power that he might control and what he might do if he becomes this leader that people around him hope he might be. And so I think you're absolutely right where the Day of Wrath works much better thematically with the book than it does with the movie. Although on a surface level with the kind of revenge plot, it does kind of make sense.
Right. And this is the thing that also gives me hope for the new film, because I know that, and I can't say his name, Dennis, I'm going to call him Dennis, the director of the new film, is a big fan of the book. And David Lynch had not read Dune before he wrote the script for this. I mean, this is David Lynch's baby for the most part. I mean, he didn't have final cut which kind of takes it away from being his baby. But the ideas behind it, the core ideas, come from someone who's a Dune newbie who doesn't necessarily understand the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's a frustrating thing.
Very.
With this. It's odd to me that Toto is the group that does the music. I don't know if they've done any other soundtracks. I don't think they have. I mean, they're basically just a pop group.
Yeah.
Right? You also have the prophecy theme, which is really just a very ethereal, just a couple of note motif by who did it again? Brian Eno, who's of course worked with U2 and worked a lot with David Bowie, and it shows up only a couple of times to my notice. I know it shows up when Paul first hears about the worms and the spice when they're flying over the spice harvester, and then right before he drinks the water of life. And so you kind of have this through line of, he's going to make the connection between the worms and the spice, and ultimately kind of, he's receiving his call to adventure, and he has that metamorphosis where we have, a lot of the hero's journey beats happen, at least in the book they do.
Right.
With the death and rebirth and all of those things. But it is very much a dark version of that. It's not, he doesn't, have the ultimate boon and then return and have wisdom for everybody. They think he does, initially, but there's definitely a dark side. So, and you get to that, especially when you get to Dune Messiah. There's a lot of that in the next book. So hopefully we'll get to see an adaptation of that at some point.
Well, I'm also kind of hoping, and there have been rumblings on the internet that the 2021 film, that there'll be a green light for the sequel, and that they might make it into a trilogy with Dune Messiah being that third movie. Who knows if that'll happen? I think that it would be fantastic if that's the case, because just from the trailers alone, I can tell you it's 100 million times more beautifully shot than the David Lynch film. And so if for that reason alone, plus all the actors, it's just insane. Jason Momoa looks amazing. We shouldn't talk about the 2021 film too much, but
yeah. And, I will say this is a good transition though. You mentioned how beautifully shot the new film is. And this one's shot by Freddie Francis, who is a 2-time Academy Award winner. He did, what did he do? He did Sons and Lovers, and he also did Glory, that's a great film. I haven't seen the first film. And he also did The Elephant Man for Lynch, which is a very interesting film and very dramatically shot and beautiful in a certain way, type of film. And it's just, there's actually a lot of people, there's Academy Award winning editing, as well. And it's just, it's less than the sum of its parts, I think.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Make some weird choices. But you mentioned the actors too. And, Kyle MacLachlan, and he just does not, I'm going to use the word gravitas. It's got hashtag gravitas. He just doesn't have that in this film for me. He does not feel like the type of person that would, inspire a group of desert Fremen to. He's
not charismatic.
No, he's not. And this movie tells you that he's charismatic, and it definitely doesn't show you. It's just all of it. They're like, yep, we'll follow you. And it's just, in the book, it's earned, but here it's just not.
Well, there's two examples that jump into my mind. The first is when they first, Jessica and Paul, when they first meet the Fremen. And there's this little scuffle. And the Fremen are like, oh, well, you bested us. So now I pledge my life to you. And like, your water is my water and our water is your water, all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, that's it? Okay. And then later on, when Paul and Chani fall in love, it literally just tells us they fell in love with like them kissing on screen. And that's it. And it just is, it's mind boggling that people thought that was good storytelling. It's not earned. And those should be important, character beats in the film, in the story. And it's like, they're not. And I think part of it is the lack of gravitas. But in general, the script doesn't do him any favors either. I
No.
mean, it's not really well written.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting is they aged up the character of Paul Atreides, and they aged up Feyd-Rautha as well. The character played by Sting, who's fantastic in this. He's super cheesy. You know, he's fantastic to watch because he's so over the top. I think everyone's melodramatic in this, except for maybe McLaughlin. He might be kind of static. But even so, you have, I mean, because the character Paul Atreides goes over through this transformation and has to be this inspiring messianic figure, and so it makes sense on paper to say we're just going to age him up a little bit, and yet, I mean, it didn't work. You swung and missed. Like you tried to do that, and you know, he's supposed to be 15. He's clearly not 15, and yet that still didn't work. So just aging him up did not fix the dramatic acting chops.
Not at all.
Question.
I love the pug. That was my favorite part.
I had a question for you about that. Why do you think there's a pug? Because I have a theory.
So pugs, historically speaking, were dogs of royalty. And so to me, it's a sign of like same thing for House Atreides.
Okay.
What's your theory?
It's kind of similar to that. It's just that this whole movie is so bizarre that here is something familiar to kind of ground you in kind of the same way that James Gunn chooses to use pop music from the 70s to kind of ground you in the bizarre part of the galaxy that the Guardians are in.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, here's some touchstones.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you know what? There's this weird like fish looking dude and people are reading each other's minds and these bald witches and all this stuff. And it's 10,000 years in the future, but we still have bugs.
We still have
okay,
bugs.
I'm good. I'm okay. I can go with that. Just the rest of it will kind of come.
I mean, your theory might hold water because that's kind of what my thinking was. It's like, okay, well, there's a pug, so I'll keep watching. But then Patrick Stewart brought the pug into battle, and that's not really their forte. They're more of like sit on the couch and eat, which is why I love them.
Yeah.
But you talked about how most of the acting is melodramatic. I think it was just all over the place.
Yeah.
Because
it's really bad.
There are moments when it's like, I feel like they should be more emotive,
right,
in their feelings, and they're not. And then they say or do something, and it's just eye rolling bad. Like, oh, come on, I don't buy that. So I honestly don't. You said Sting, as Feyd-Rautha. I didn't think it was good.
No, he's not good. I'm not saying he's good.
Okay.
He's just committed. He just, he doesn't hold back.
Sure. I can see that.
Yeah, he's having fun.
Yeah.
And there's some good actors in this film.
Yeah.
You mentioned Patrick Stewart. Dean Stockwell's great too. And he's actually not bad in this film. And neither Patrick Stewart. They're both good.
But like with Patrick Stewart, he really doesn't have that much.
No.
So it's like I think it's less bad because he's not in the film as much.
Yeah. And it's amazing that, both of those guys, he and Dean Stockwell, kind of escape the stain of this movie, right? Mm-hmm. It's like when both of those get in, when Patrick Stewart gets Star Trek and Dean Stockwell's in Quantum Leap, they're not, Dean Stockwell's been in tons of stuff, Married to the Mob and some other things. He doesn't have, hey, that's the guy from Dune.
Mm-hmm.
Like that didn't follow them, which is pretty great. I guess everyone was like, well, you know what? It wasn't your fault that you were in this heap of trash. So that seems mean, but David Lynch has essentially just disowned this film too. So
yeah, that's not a good sign.
No. They do preserve some of the best lines from the book in this film.
Yeah, they do.
And I do like the fact that this film in some ways kind of serves as like a Cliff Notes version of the book. So if you've read the book, but only if you've read the book, right? If you haven't read the book, then you're lost, probably, or confused or just frustrated. But if you have read the book, I enjoyed it way more now that I've seen it. I'm like, okay, well, that's the part. I can tune out when I don't like that part. But, this is the part I really liked here. I really like the Gom Jabbar. I think that's a great... That's one of my favorite scenes in this film. It's one of my favorite scenes in the book, and I guess that it kind of carries over there. So you have the speech about fear is the mind killer. It's a great little mantra that I think he pulls that part off okay.
I I do have to say that the feeling that I got, I think your description of it with like the Cliff Notes is a really good way to describe it, because it felt like they took individual, almost like little vignettes from the book, and there was very little connective tissue. So even though there were lines from the book, I must not fear, fear is the mind killer being the best one of them. It just felt so smashed together in the editing room, where it feels like, okay, we filmed this scene and this scene, and that's the order the book had them in, so we'll stitch them together like that. And one that struck me was when Duke Leto and Paul, and I'm forgetting the other character's name, but they were on like the flying vessel, and they go rescue the workers.
From Lee Kynes is on there too.
Yeah. And in the book, and to an extent in the film, it's a good character defining moment for Duke Leto. And if it is Keynes, he goes like, this man, he thinks only of the workers.
Right.
And it's just, even the lines, and I believe that was a line from the book too, but it's the way it's presented is just so bad that even the lines I loved from the film, or in the film from the book, I just, it was more cringy than anything for me. I was just like, I can't enjoy it.
Yeah. It's almost like they were just told, just stand there and just have a blank face, because you're going to do ADR later for your thoughts.
Right.
So we'll just tell the audience what you're doing.
Right.
So it's like, do not emote. Don't act with your face, because we're going to tell people what you're thinking. Like in a play, but really, really badly done.
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if that's what they did,
because it looks that way.
That's
Because you
kind
have
of what it looks like.
Max von Sydow. I mean, you have these great actors.
Yeah.
And he's barely in the film. He's not served very well at all. He's much, much more important in the book. But he just comes. Why is he even in the film if you're not even going to use him, right?
Well, and that's where I feel like they needed to take out the thoughts, right? And they needed to add dialogue and action to show that characterization, but in some other way.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be, that would be more of a spiritual adaptation of the book. And I feel like that would have been better served. The story would have been better served that way.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about one of the changes from the book, because it comes in body language as well, in that you see the Emperor visibly nervous in front of the navigator.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Because he's the Emperor of the known universe. And as much as, the Spacing Guild they're kind of like this triumvirate, right? You have the Emperor and the Imperium, and you have the Spacing Guild, and you have the Bene Gesserit, essentially, as like these three big powers of the galaxy. But they threaten him on multiple occasions. And like, did you read the book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think at least twice, the very, very strange navigator tells the Emperor to stop talking. Like, be quiet. I'm talking. You're the one who's listening. Yeah. And it's like, that doesn't sound right. It doesn't look
even
right.
If you, I don't know why you'd get that interpretation from there. What did you think about the costumes in this film?
I'm glad you brought them up, because I thought overall I actually quite liked the Atreides costumes. I felt like the kind of very smart military uniforms that they wore at the beginning made a lot of sense. I think they looked really good. Some of the Emperor's retinue, if you will, I think looked the part. I thought you mentioned already kind of the gold color for the opulence. I thought they looked fine. The Bene Gesserit looked strange, which I'm fine with. Like, I can roll with it.
I'm even good with the baldness on that. I mean, it's a weird choice.
It's a weird choice, but it's a choice.
Group of people. So,
I hated the Harkonnen stuff.
It's bad.
Well, and it's just over the top, right? Because in the book, it's very, very obvious that the Harkonnens are supposed to be the bad guys, right? And I think the film takes that very obvious thing and then they push it to an 11, where it's like the servants' ears are sewn together and they have the weird like blood ritual thing going on,
Yeah.
and
Blood
very
plugs and stuff.
obvious like disgusting boils over everyone's faces. And it's just like, okay, but there's no subtlety in that at all.
No.
It's like you're not trusting the viewer at all and there's no subtlety in this film.
Yeah.
And the Harkonnens are the worst of it.
Yeah. I was going to, just to add on to that, where you have, the mentats, which in the book, they have a physical distinguishing distinguishing feature where they have the stained lips. And they both have the stained lips in this too. But Lynch was like, let's also add crazy hair and eyebrows.
Yeah, that too.
But you don't need that because it's apparently, according to the book, like it's fairly obvious. Oh, that dude's a mentat. Look at his lips. Like it's something that's going to jump out. It's red stain, the sappho, the internalizing the spice lips. But again, throw subtlety right out the window. Bob Ringwood, who did the costumes for 3 Batman movies, did Batman, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, did Alien 3 and 4 and a bunch of other stuff, did the costumes for this one too. And so that kind of makes sense with all the leather. When you're looking at like the Space and Guild guys and even the still suits, kind of have, if you look carefully, that could be like a bat suit a little bit.
I kind of like
buy
that. Yeah,
I kind of like that look. And it's very stylized and it looks like they spent some time on that. Even the Harkonnens, which is ugly, it looks like they actually put some thought into it. But the Sardaukar, they look like they're just wearing radiation suits.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre. And that's another thing in this film where when they show up the first time on Arrakis and they're, leading the purge essentially of the Atreides, it's not really clear that they're the Sardaukar. But later on in the film, they suit up again and like, oh, that's right. In the book, I remember that, the Emperor was in on it and all that stuff.
And and they mentioned that too, because like at the very beginning, so, Dune has this very strong vein of political intrigue, right? Where it's these, quote unquote, noble houses who are warring against each other. And there's none of that intrigue. There's none of that, as we mentioned, subtlety. The Emperor just literally says to his whole court, everyone who's there, yeah, we're going to pretend. He basically monologues his plan to kill and backstab the Atreides clan.
Yep.
And it's just like, okay, why? Why are you saying that? Why are we doing this? This makes no sense. And so I will say that when the navigator from the Space Guild shows up, I had no idea who or what he was.
No.
And I had just read, most of the book. I had to go look it up. Like, what is that thing?
Yeah.
And the weird kind of space travel makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah. He's that like fish dude. Like he's supposed to be a mutated human.
Right.
But yeah, it's not remotely. And it's described in pretty good detail in the book. But they're just like, let's make him look like a fish.
I looked it up on the wiki. And based on the description in the book, it is supposed to be like this mutated human, which looks nothing like what you see in the film.
Yeah.
And again, that's where it's just a strange choice. And there's no explanation for what he is, as far as I remember in the film. Like I had to look up like, okay, what is this thing? Why is he like threatening the Emperor?
Right. I think there might be a little bit in dialogue that says that they have that weird opening thing where they set up, the special secret message from the guild.
Yeah.
That might be in there. That might be spoken in conversation as well. I had subtitles on and I think I might have seen it at some point, but I also knew, so I might have just glossed over that.
Yeah.
To know. But speaking of design, some weird design. Clearly that's weird. The ornithopter is all wrong as well. There's no flapping wings. It's just a box. It looks like a giant cardboard box.
Yeah.
And I get that pulling that off would be difficult, but it's so boxy.
Yeah.
It doesn't even work. Whereas like the Spice Harvester works really, really well.
Mm.
And even, the Atreides ships, I thought was kind of an interesting concept where you had this ornate door, like in this, I don't know, cigar, I guess is what the way it's that massive, freighter is set up. And I kind of like the way they're kind of just racked in there. I thought that was kind of an interesting way because, they don't have the ability to travel, between planets without the Spacing Guild. And so it would make sense that they'd have to kind of load them up like it's a ferry, essentially. I thought, there was some interesting things, but it just, there's so many things that didn't work.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that don't work, the weirding modules, to me, is the most egregious. Well, there's two right here. One, I'll go back to the weirding modules. The first is Paul is using a computer to look up stuff on Arrakis.
Yeah.
And if you're just watching the film, not a big deal. But if you've read the book and you know about the Butlerian Jihad, where they outlaw the thinking computers because they had a whole war with them, he would not be using a computer.
Doesn't make any sense.
It's literally, in the book, it would be literally sacrilege because they've got all of the things about religion and all. And it's a very religious society.
It is.
So like, did you not read the book? There is no computers. That's why there's mentats. It's all connected. But then the weirding modules is the other thing too. And I know this is very much a Lynch thing where he didn't want to have martial arts out in the desert. But that's what it is.
Yeah.
And you get a tiny little, it's like he doesn't go whole hog on that because there is one instance of it. Like you mentioned the scene where they meet the Fremen for the first time and Jessica overpowers Stilgar really fast. And they mention the weirding way briefly. But then they're like, yeah, the weirding module is part of the weirding way. We're just going to have these sonic weapons where you just say something loud and it blows stuff up.
Right.
It just makes me mad.
It's just dumb. That's all it is. It's just, it doesn't make any sense.
And how did the Fremen make those in the desert? Like they had the plans because Yui stowed them in the orthopter, but no, because again, one of the themes, I'm getting some serious like Rise of Skywalker vibes where what's the lesson of it's, redemptive violence, is that, there's very much a nature versus technology vibe in the book.
Yeah.
They're riding the sandworms. They're in touch with the planet and all. And it's like, nope, they just have some sonic weapons and they're going to blow crap up.
Well, and it, and like I said, I haven't quite finished the book, but I feel like there are some very strong colonialism versus the native inhabitants going on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is also very quickly discarded. Because I think there's some lip service paid to the Fremen at the beginning of the film. But then they're basically just treated, at the end, they're just Paul's personal army. Period.
Right.
There's nothing really, there's no thought about them and how they have this dream of creating Arrakis as an inhabitable planet, right? And bringing water to Arrakis and essentially allowing people to live freely on Arrakis because of available water. I mean, ultimately, that's one of their dreams for the Fremen. And right at the end, you have the rain come down.
Atrocious.
So I'm assuming that's not part of the book.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I'm gonna go back just 2 seconds to the last line of the movie, which is not in the book, and it gets it completely wrong. So she says, Princess Irulan says, Muad'Dib had become the hand of God, fulfilling the Fremen prophecy. Okay, I'm good with that so far. Where there was war, Muad'Dib would now bring peace. That's wrong. Where there was hatred, Muad'Dib would bring love. That's also wrong. To lead the people to true freedom that changed the face of Arrakis, and as it's coming down. And then you have, his sister, Alia, I think she's pretty good in this. I actually liked her.
Yeah.
I liked her just fine. How is this possible? Because he is the Kwisatz Haderach. And heavily implying that he caused it to rain.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the only way to read it.
Oh, that's definitely the implication.
Yeah. Frank Herbert, the author of the book, called that out. And for the most part, he actually liked the movie. He liked what they had tried to do. But he's like, he's a guy playing at God. He's not literally God.
Right.
He can't do that. And even if he could, you just completely ruined the entire ecology of Arrakis.
Yeah.
All those sandworms are going to die.
Yeah.
You've just completely cut off the spice and all, like, you're missing the point
Yeah.
to such a degree that is so egregious.
Well, and I think
it looks cool, but yeah.
I think the lines were fine because part of the story in the book is that Paul is kind of, like you said, playing God.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually fine with the lines because that felt like playing God. You know, they're talking him up. I'm okay with that, right? Because that's and to a large extent, that's what a lot of them believe. They believe that Paul is kind of the chosen one, right?
True.
But the rain,
Yeah.
that definitely felt wrong, and that felt like no. It feels like the people who were making the film bought into Paul being the chosen one, when it's like that is not the point of the book.
Yeah, and even in the book Dune, in the little epigraphs at the beginning of the chapters, there are some, and I think even fairly early on, where Princess Irulan mentions like the blood, like he's going to cause a lot of violence.
Yeah.
Like that's not a surprise,
right?
When that happens, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, where Paul's having these prophetic dreams of the jihad, and how do I fulfill my destiny, but also not cause the massacre of millions of innocents. Mm-hmm. And so there's this constant struggle that's completely absent from this film. And it would have been interesting if this film would have made money and they had greenlit the second one, because there was talk that they were going to do more. I mean, it's Hollywood. Of course, they're going to want to do the next one. It's already sitting there, right? If they would have done Dune Messiah to try and make that work with this, where you have the fallout of the jihad, spoiler alert, that's what it's about.
Yeah. I don't think I mean, they would have had to just maul and mangle the book.
Yeah.
To try and like make a story out of it. So
yeah.
Because it's very much the hero's journey, right? Where chosen one, and Paul comes to the rescue at the end and leads the people to victory, which is both the point and not the point of the book, right? Where it's like, yes, you can have people who are, have that chosen one aura, gravitas to them. Maybe you shouldn't trust them. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I felt like they got there and then they went too far and kind of ruined the thematic, they kind of ruined the theme that should have been there.
Right. So anything in characters we haven't covered, or should we talk about our final thoughts? Do you have anything else? I mean, there's a huge cast. So
I think for closing thoughts, I think closing on the characters is pretty good because, like I said, there's certain, it feels like a bunch of vignettes from the book, which, okay, it's fine. But there was something lacking in the characters of the film. And, for me, I kind of describe it as this believability. We kind of describe acting as, static, dramatic, or melodramatic, where dramatic is you're kind of hitting your beats of you're showing emotion so that people can connect with you. And they just weren't doing it. And ultimately, I think that's why I fail, because I find the book so much more engrossing. And really, you can really see like the parts pulled from the book. And so for whatever reason, the actors, they didn't pull it off. I did not feel, and here's one thing that strikes me. So I've watched all the trailers for the 2021 Dune, right? And there's one particular line that Duke Leto says in the trailer, where and I don't quite remember, but paraphrasing, Paul says something like, "And what if I can't succeed? What if I can't hold, the planet or whatever?" And Duke Leto says, "Even if you fail at that, you'll still have succeeded in the only thing that matters, being my son." That one line has more connection, more pathos, more empathy, right? You can connect with that because who wouldn't want a parent or a parent figure to say something like that to them? already I love Duke Leto.
Yep.
And not just because
Yeah.
it's Oscar Isaac.
Right.
But it's like that right there. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that connection. And I'm already more connected to Duke Leto from the new movie because of that one line than the Duke Leto from this film. And that's a horrible, horrible, I mean, that's a bad sign.
Yeah.
And that's the best way I can describe it is I could not connect to the characters. And if I can't connect to the characters, there's nothing there.
No, I'm with you. So is it so bad it's good, or is it just so bad that it stays bad?
It stays bad.
It just stays bad.
Stays bad.
And so I'm going to finish with, how about the end credits, man? The Toto music playing.
Alphabetical order.
Alphabetical order. It's like yearbook photos. It's like, yeah, we did this movie. Yeah, we did. We own it. It's, it just doesn't work. It's so like, man, yeah, that's right. That guy was in this. And I like that. That's like the feeling you're supposed to have. And you're just like, there's just a list of people responsible for the 2 hours you just lost.
This travesty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, I'm glad that I make you watch it, and I'm looking forward to you making me watch a horrible film. But again, it's kind of like you're cleansing the palate, right? You're getting ready for,
I guess.
How much better? How much better will the 2021 film, the new film, be? Because it has this as the bar.
But you're forgetting the fact that I could have just not watched this film and still watched the 2021 Dune.
That's true.
So yeah, I do need to think of a horrible movie for you to watch.
That sounds awesome. We'll do that in the new year. So with that, this is a very special episode for us. This is actually our podiversary.
Yeah.
1 year ago, we started with that other name, Horizont Community College, which I still love. I still love the name. I still love the logo. Name. I still like the whole idea, the whole brand. But as you know, we are now reading between the reels, and we're so grateful for each and every one of you that listen and download and subscribe and share and follow us in any of our numerous places. And I want to just give out some shout outs to some people. We have a voicemail from Dan Zare. I think maybe playing that at the end would probably be the best fit for that. But I want to just start with thanking my wife and my kids for giving me time to do this, and the support. And I'm sure, Matt, you feel the same way about your wife. And, just being able to book some time. And honestly, Matt, I want to thank you just for, having a time where, something to look forward to. We're just, we hang out and talk about movies. It's like one of the highlights of my week for sure. I want to say thanks to Dan. We can't really thank him enough. Dan definitely came in and helped us from the beginning, honestly, even in our first incarnation. And then with the rebrand, I want to thank Mike Pilot, who's always been supportive, since the first time I talked to him about teaching Star Wars in the classroom. Brian Young, who I know is was a guest on one of our early episodes and has said he wants to be on again. I really think we need to do Roger Rabbit when he's on.
Yes.
I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Ian Desher, who we've talked to multiple times, author William Shakespeare Star Wars, is he did in the classroom with my students, and I think we'll have him on to talk about Back to the Future. I think is kind of the tentative plan. David Collins from the Soundtrack Show, love that show. If you're not listening to the Soundtrack Show, please do. That guy knows everything about music, as far as I'm concerned. I've learned so much from him, and he's just he's a teacher that teaches. He's a teacher, even if he's not by profession, but he's teaching us music in a way that makes it easy for people who don't have music degrees. Aaron Harris, I want to thank him. Jeff McGee, Corey Heidschmidt, The Lethal Mullet. That's another interesting podcast, great podcast from Down Under. Adam O'Brien is The Lethal Mullet. He's very complimentary of us and is usually on our Facebook group a lot, jumping in. I want to thank Daniel Contreras from Star Wars. Now This Is Podcasting, Star Wars Podcast Day. We had a great time being involved with that last year, and I'm thinking if we do that again this year, we should definitely do the holiday special, which is like this movie bad, but that would be the perfect time to do that. Thomas Riddle. I want to thank Thomas Riddle and Wes Dodgens from Star Wars in the Classroom. Thomas Riddle also does Imaginary Education, which is a fantastic podcast with educators, and we'll get Thomas on at some point, I think, to talk Indiana Jones. I want to thank Adam Bray, who's been very supportive of us, and we need to have him on too, because that guy knows. He writes, the Marvel guidebooks for DK, and he's a great dude. Jordan Mason, everyone who participates in RBR Movie Buffs, Jordan's in there as well, and he writes lots of great articles online for Cinelinx, and has been a big support of us. And so, he participates in RBR Movie Buffs, our Facebook group, and just again want to just thank everybody who listens and subscribes.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you to everyone you mentioned, and in particular to my wife and your wife for letting us do this, and to you, because really, in a lot of ways, this is all because of you, and
it's my fault.
It really is, but really, it started, when you brought up your idea for teaching film in the classroom. And I went, that's really cool. And I took it and ran with it and, brought it back to you, and we kind of workshopped it and went back and forth and, meeting of the minds. And, but, without you, none of that ever happens. And I got to say that every time we talk about a movie, I am continuously learning something new. You always bring up fantastic points. Your eye for catching things in films, I think, is extraordinary. And it's a little stunning because I take a peek at your notes too before we record. I'm like, oh man, I didn't notice that. Did we watch the same movie? And so it's always fun because you always bring such a keen eye and sense for the movie making process. And that's fun for me. I learn something new every time we talk. So thank you, Craig. It's a lot of fun.
Well, that's far too kind. And honestly, I can echo the same thing. I watch these films and write down my notes and go, I don't want to do this by myself though, because this would be so boring. And I don't know what to say about this. And I know Matt will have several things to talk about, and he'll jump off on certain tangents that I didn't even consider, and he'll have some long extended metaphor or
something to
story say. and it will be amazing, and I'll just be like, yes, I have nothing to add. And I know that's going to happen periodically, and I look forward to that, and I look forward to talking to you about film every time we do this. So let's play the voicemail from Dan, and then we'll get out of here. Yeah.
Hey guys, it's Dan there from Coffee with Kenobi. Congratulations on 1 year of tremendous shows, insight, humor, intelligence, and overall fun. Thanks so much for all you do, brightening up my day. Every time I listen to your show, you make me think, you make me laugh, and you make me scratch my head. Pacific Rim, really? That's the show? Oh man, we've got a lot of work to do, but I have faith in you. In all seriousness, love you guys. Keep up the great work, and congratulations again.
Thank you, Dan.
Yes.
That made me laugh out loud when he dropped the Pacific Rim thing, because Dan, again, hates Pacific Rim, and we made him at least have to listen to a podcast about
how good it was.
Possibly. He was like, I don't get it. What movie were you watching?
Yeah.
A great one.
Thank you, Dan. That was a nice message.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So as we close for real, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook, email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website.
If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. We'd love to hear your feedback, and it really helps get the word out about the podcast. And if you haven't yet, please join our Facebook group. It's a safe place to share your thoughts and discuss all things related to movies.
One last thing, our next episode will be a review of the original Ghostbusters from 1984. If you want, you can send us an email or a voicemail about your favorite moments from Ghostbusters, and we'll share them on the next episode.